My Playful Wife, Episode 16, Kaveri's Story, written by Mia. Kaveri had a story of her own, though it took 3 meetings before she let any of it out, and even then she let it out the way she did everything, without ceremony, laid flat on the table like a bolt of cloth she expected you to assess for yourself. The first meeting was the sample review, the one I have already described, the hard March light, the rose-dark silk held up to it, the word distance arriving off the fabric as though it had been waiting there the whole time for someone to read it aloud. I had watched that from the kitchen, a spectator at my own wife's unveiling. I had understood, watching it, that Kaveri was not a buyer in the ordinary sense. She was something closer to a midwife. She did not want to purchase a thing. She wanted to be present at its becoming and to be the one who named it, and there was a hunger under her precision that I noticed without yet understanding. The second meeting was a fitting at the boutique itself. I did not go. The boutique was Saloni's professional ground, and I had no business on it, and besides, I had learned the value of my own absence. But Saloni came home and described it, in the fragmentary way she described her professional life, the important part surfacing over dinner without announcement, a sentence here, a detail there, so that I assembled the place in my mind across an evening rather than receiving it whole. It was a converted bungalow in one of the older South Delhi colonies, she said, the kind of place built to feel like a secret. You came in off an ordinary lane through an ordinary gate and found yourself in rooms that had been arranged by someone who understood that the experience of buying a beautiful thing should itself be beautiful, low light, old stone, a courtyard with a tree in it, the clothes displayed not as merchandise, but as though they were resting between lives. Kaveri had built it alone, over 20 years, Saloni said. There was no Mr. Kaveri in any of the stories. I noted that and said nothing, and filed it. The third meeting, Kaveri came to us. She arrived on a Sunday morning with no appointment, and 2 paper cups of coffee from the good place near the market, holding them up at the door like credentials. Saloni let her in without visible surprise. Saloni has the rare quality of treating the unexpected as though she had in fact been expecting it all along, so that the world rarely catches her flat-footed and almost never gets to enjoy doing so. I was in the kitchen. I stayed. They sat in the living room, the 2 of them, and I heard their voices through the half-wall, the professional register slowly softening into something else, the particular loosening that happens when 2 people who have spent some weeks carefully measuring each other arrive, by some mutual unspoken decision, at the conclusion that the measuring is finished and they may now simply talk. I did not try to listen, but the flat is not large, and some sentences carry, and one of them carried. Your husband, Kaveri said, does he know about the work? What it actually is for you? A pause. I went still at the sink. He's learning, Saloni said. Good, Kaveri said. The ones who learn are the ones worth keeping. It's the only thing that matters in the end. Not the ones who arrive knowing. Those ones stop. It's the ones who keep learning. I set down the cup I was holding carefully so that it made no sound. There was a silence. And then Kaveri's voice again, pitched to carry this time, deliberately, around the wall and into the kitchen where she had known all along I was standing. There's a 3rd coffee, she said. I bought 3. Are you going to come in, or are you going to keep pretending to wash a clean cup? I came in. She looked up at me with the same assessment she had given the fabric at the first meeting, frank, accurate, entirely without apology, the look of a woman who has made 10,000 judgments and learned to trust the speed of her own eye. I sat down. She slid the 3rd coffee across to me. You have a good face, she said. It was not a compliment. She said it the way she would have said good grain or good weight. An assessment of material, value neutral, true. Faces lie less than people think. Yours hasn't learned to. That's rare in a man your age. Thank you, I said, unsure what else there was to say. Saloni tells me you've been paying more attention lately, she said. Kaveri, Saloni said, a warning in it. She didn't say it like that. Kaveri said, unbothered. She said it better. She said it the way you say a thing you're not sure you're allowed to be glad about yet. She looked at Saloni, and something passed between the two women, a current I was not party to. But that's what she meant. Saloni looked down at her coffee. Kaveri turned back to me, and then she told me her story, not as confession and not as warning exactly, but as data, a thing she had learned that she thought I could use. My husband stopped paying attention in our 9th year, she said. I want you to hear the structure of it, because the structure is the lesson. He didn't leave. He didn't shout. There was no woman, or if there was, I never found her, and it wouldn't have been the point. He just stopped looking, stopped seeing me. I became furniture to him, useful and unregarded, a thing the room contained. And here's the part that should frighten you. I didn't notice for 2 years. 2 years of being unseen, and I didn't feel it because the not being seen came on so gradually that I mistook it for peace. I thought we had become comfortable. I told people we had become comfortable. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, precisely, the way she had turned the silk to the light. 4 years after I finally noticed we were done. It takes a long time to die, a thing like that. Longer than you'd think. There's no single moment you can point to. That's what makes it deadly. The dramatic deaths people survive, the affairs, the fights, the leaving and coming back. It's the quiet kind that finishes you. The kind where one person simply stops looking and the other person gets used to the dark. She said all of this without drama, in the plain voice of someone reading out the dimensions of a room. Don't stop paying attention, she said, to me finally. That's all. That's the whole of what I know. Everything else is technique. I won't, I said, and I understood, saying it, that I was being handed something, that this hard, precise, solitary woman had decided, on the evidence of a good face and a wife who was glad in a way she wasn't sure she was allowed to be, to give me the one thing 20 years of her own loss had taught her, for free, on a Sunday, over a coffee I hadn't asked for. She looked at me a moment longer, satisfied or as near to satisfied as she came. Then she picked up her coffee and shifted registers completely, the personal folding back into the professional in a single clean motion. The collection is going to be extraordinary, she said. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I don't say that because saying it cheapens it, and because it's almost never true. It's true this time. The show is the 15th, Thursday. Tell me you'll both be there. The last week before the show was a siege. 12 pieces by May had been an impossibility in March and remained, technically, an impossibility in the days before the 15th, and Saloni met the impossibility the way she met all of them, by declining to concede that it was one. She stopped sleeping in any reliable way. The spare room ran all night. I would wake at 3 and find the bed empty and the thin line of light under the door, and I had learned by now not to go in and tell her to rest, because rest was not the thing she needed, and offering it would only have made my own anxiety into her problem. What she needed was for the rest of life to ask nothing of her. So I made the rest of life ask nothing. I did the things, the marketing, the cooking, the bills, the whole small administration of two people's existence silently, so that the only thing left in her field of vision was the work. I learned to leave a plate at the spare room door and take away the last one, cold and untouched as often as not. I learned to set a glass of water where her hand would find it without her having to look up. I went to the gym before dawn because it was the only hour that was mine, and Samir, who had watched me arrive at that gym erect man a year before and had said almost nothing in all the months since, looked at me one gray morning over the bar and said, "You're carrying something heavy these days." "My wife's making 12 dresses," I said. He nodded as though that explained the weight on the bar, which in a way it did. There was a night, 3 before the show, when she finished the last piece. I was asleep. She woke me. She stood in the bedroom doorway with her hair coming loose and her hands chalked white and a look on her face I had not seen before, and she said, "It's done. They're all done. Come and look." I got up and went and looked, and the spare room was full, all 12 of them on the rail, the whole of distance, the rose-dark piece at the center, and she stood in the doorway of the thing she had made and could not, herself, quite believe that it existed outside her own head. "You made all of that," I said. "I made all of that," she said, testing the sentence for soundness, the way you press a new floor with your weight before you trust it. And then she cried, not much, and not from any sadness, just the body finally setting down a thing it had been carrying for months, and I held her in the doorway of the full room at 4 a.m, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that could be added to the fact of the room. In the days that remained, she slept, at last, in long collapsed stretches, and I guarded the sleep like a dog at a gate. The pieces went to Kaveri's on the Wednesday, wrapped and boxed with the tenderness usually reserved for the injured, and the flat without them felt suddenly enormous and faintly bereft, the spare room a cleared battlefield. On the Thursday morning, she was calm in a way that frightened me more than any nerves could have. The flat calm of a person who has done everything she is able to do and handed the rest to the world. "There's nothing left to fix," she said at breakfast, marveling at it. "For the first time in months, there's nothing left to fix." "How does that feel?" I said. "Terrible," she said. "I don't know what to do with my hands." The show was on a Thursday evening, which meant I left work early for the first time in years. I do not mean I left on time. I mean I left early. I stood up in the middle of a meeting, very nearly in the middle of a sentence that someone else was saying, and I said I had to go, and I gathered my things and went, and the faces around the table did the thing faces do when a reliable man does an unreliable thing. A year ago, this would have been unthinkable to me. The meeting would have won, as the meeting always won, as the office had always quietly won the argument with the rest of my life. I walked out into the afternoon and waited for the regret to arrive, and it did not arrive. It simply did not come. I had spent so many years believing that the things I gave my attention to were the things that deserved it, and somewhere in the last year I had learned to tell the difference, and the meeting was on the wrong side of the line, and my wife's life's work being unveiled was on the right side, and the matter was when you actually looked at it, not close. I arrived at Kaveri's bungalow at 6. The space had been transformed. The retail, quiet-eyed assembled in my mind from Saloni's fragments was gone, replaced by the particular charged hush of a thing about to be revealed. Perhaps 30 people, buyers and press, and the kind of people who knew Kaveri from 20 years of operating in this specific small world, all holding glasses and speaking in the low voices people use around objects they suspect are important. The courtyard tree had been hung with small lights. The old stone held the evening. Saloni was somewhere in the back. She had asked me, that morning, not to come and find her before it began. "I can't have you looking at me with that face before I go out there. I'll come apart, and I had respected it, the way I had learned to respect the architecture of her process. The collection came out piece by piece. I am not the person to describe clothes. I have learned the vocabulary, but I will never own it the way she does. So I will only say that each piece was everything she had been working toward through the autumn and the winter and the impossible compressed spring. Not only as craft, though the craft was there, visible to me now in a way it would not have been a year ago. Every fall and grain and considered seam. As statement. As the thing the name had promised. Distance. Garment after garment that looked, at rest, like something closing, dusk colors, end of things colors, and then opened, impossibly, when it moved, when the body underneath it walked it into the light. I watched the room watch it. I watched people who saw clothes for a living lean forward. And then the rose dark piece came out. It had grown since the spare room. It had become the thing it had been promising to become all those months, the keystone, and it needed the whole room to be understood, needed space and movement, and the high old ceiling and the hush. I heard it, the intake of breath from the people around me, the small involuntary sound a room makes when it is shown something it did not know it wanted. I had known that fabric from its beginning. I had been in the lane in Lajput Nagar the day she bought it, the three of us pressed together in the crowd. I had been in the flat when it was cut, when the first scissor line went into it and Saloni held her breath, because you cannot uncut silk. I had been there for the pinning and the unpinning, the 2 in the morning despair, and the small word simpler that broke it open. I had watched it become, across a whole year, from impulse to keystone. And standing in that room, in the hush, watching the thing I had watched become, I understood something that settled in me with the quiet weight of a true thing, that I had been part of what it became. Not in any material way. I had not sewn a stitch, would not have known how. But the year that had made Saloni into a woman who could make this thing had also, in the same fire, made me into a man who could stand in this room and understand it. We had been changed by the same year. The collection was, in some way I could feel but could not have defended, a record of both of us. She had made it out of silk. I had made, out of the same months, the eyes to see it with. She came out at the end. The applause, the turning of the room toward her. She stood at the edge of it and looked at the room that was looking at her, and her face was doing the thing it did when she was holding something large without letting it spill. And then, across all those heads, she found me. I put my hands together. I raised them slightly, not applause exactly. Something more private than applause, meant for one person across a crowded room. There you are. I saw it. I saw all of it become. She smiled, the real one, the stomach one, surprised out of her even here, even now, and then she looked away, quickly, toward Kaveri, who was already deep in conversation with a buyer, already turning the beautiful thing into the practical thing, already doing the work that let the beautiful thing go on existing. I wrote it down that night, after, when the flat was dark and she was finally asleep, emptied out and elsewhere. Kaveri lost her marriage to inattention and gave me the lesson for free. Don't stop looking. Tonight, I didn't. I stood in a room full of people who see clothes for a living and watched them see what I have been watching for a year. The rose silk opened and the room breathed in. I was part of what it became, not the silk, the seeing. We were made by the same fire. I have no better way to say it. To be continued in episode 17, after the show.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 16 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
Ai mia.
Thank you for listening.